Welcome to the Candace's Pack Dog Rescue Show with your host, JP Mendoza.
Thank you very much, Taniya. All right, this woman needs no introduction. She's basically who we've been talking about all season long with the Lucas Agnew Workshop interview series. I couldn't have thought of a better way to end the season than to interview the master herself. And make sure you listen until the end because I shared an exciting announcement about the progress of the rescue. Please welcome Cheri Wulff Lucas. Cheri Wulff Lucas, thank you so much for being with me here today. I can't tell you how much of an honor this is for me. It's a little bit unbelievable, but it's also amazing what the universe brings sometimes, and I'm really happy you're here. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm very excited to be a part of your first season.
I was just telling you off the air that I can't think of a better way to end the season than to have the woman that I've basically been talking about with my guests for the entire season. So I'm pretty sure everybody that I've spoken to, we've mentioned you some way or another, and basically we just have nothing but good things to say about the workshop. So I hope you've been listening to most of the episodes.
I have. I haven't missed a single one. I listened to the one with Lisa this morning. So so that was awesome. But yeah, I've listened to all of them. They were amazing.
Oh, that's so great.
For your first season of doing this, you're pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
Good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So Cheri, I wanted to do something a little bit different because I know that you've done a lot of great interviews and I've heard awesome interviews with you on other people's podcasts. So I don't want to go too much into your background. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get more into the education, the nitty gritty of like dog training and what people. I want people to be able to come away from listening to this with something like, oh wow, I'm going to try this with my dog, or oh, I didn't know about that, because I try to cater to people who don't know anything about dogs, people who have dogs but they might have a problem, they don't know how to fix it, dog trainers who also listen, rescuers. So I kind of want to be as diverse as I can be, and I want to make the most of my time with you, if that's all right.
That's what I like to talk about. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, great. But first, before we get into that, like many people, I know you mostly from the Dog Whisperer, your Dog Whisperer appearances. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that feels like a really long time for you since that show was on the air and you were a trainer on the show. My question is, what would you say is the main difference between you as a trainer now versus back then when the Dog Whisperer was popular?
Wow, that's a good question. You give me a really good one right out the gate. Wow, I have evolved a lot since then. I would say my roots are still everything that I learned in the very beginning, which for me was a metamorphosis that was pretty huge because I came from a rescue background. I wasn't somebody that grew up wanting to be a trainer. Never thought of myself as a teacher, never thought of myself as helping someone else with that kind of an issue. I just was a humaniac who loved dogs, and all that I knew how to do was to rescue, save, love, and find homes for. And I never knew there was anything beyond that. So I had to, when I first started doing behavior work, I wasn't even sure that I was a behaviorist yet. And until I remember one time, Cesar said to me early on, I was hesitant to charge somebody for what I knew. I'm talking 21 years ago, at least. And he said, why not? You know more than they do. And I never thought of it that way before, So I tell my students that all the time now. If you have something of value that you can add to a dog owner and their dog, then you have something of value. I mean, you're a trainer, and from that perspective. So I feel like to go back to your original question, what I feel that I've done most to change is that initially I was doing a lot of dog behavior things based on the way I carried myself, the way I handled myself with dogs. And I trained a lot of times without verbal cues, which I still don't train. I'm not a very talky trainer at all. But it wasn't until I had gotten probably 8 or 9 years into this that I realized that my clients can't necessarily replicate what I have been able to do as a professional. So I need to somehow level the playing field. So I had to begin using more cues with what I did, so that they could use those same cues and get the same results. So that's one area that I've changed in. I would say the biggest leap that I did was to go from basically being primarily punitive, correcting a dog for bad behavior, to teaching a dog how to not make the mistake in the first place, to make it very clear to the dog what it is that I want and teach the dog how to comply, as opposed to saying, if you fail, this is what's going to happen. That's a pretty huge shift. And I would say that would be the primary change that I've made over the years.
I definitely want to go back to that because I do have some training based topics. And I love that you said that. But first, on the first thing that you said, I can tell you that I totally relate to what you're saying as far as coming from a rescue background and your intention was never to be a trainer. I wanted to have a good relationship with my dog. And then she inspired me to do the rescue thing. And I wanted to learn more so that I can be a good leader for the rescue dogs. And then I can educate people so that they're not taking home a disaster. And then that relationship fails. So I remember I had a conversation with, April Sullivan
Right.
from Happy Social Dog. I was telling her, I said, I don't know. I was thinking about doing a side business for training. And I said, well, I don't know how much to charge. Like, how do you even figure out how to charge? And she told me, well, first, what you do is you look at the local trainers or dog walkers and trainers, and you see what it is they're charging. And then you raise your price because you're way more experienced than them. And I remember being kind of humbled by that because I didn't really see myself as, somebody with that much experience or somebody that's better than just the local dog walker that's just walking dogs. If that makes kind of sense, because I do want to educate. But we first met doing virtual sessions because I was having some issues with my dog Candace, and you invited me to your Missing Link Raw Intuitive Talent Workshop. And when you invited me, we were talking about how you wanted to make sure that this workshop that you created was a lot more hands-on and just a lot of extra stuff taken out, and it's just really raw. And also, we should mention you do this with Brian Agnew, who's also a well-known trainer. How did you two start working together, and how did you put together the workshops? How did the idea come about, and what's the history behind the workshops?
Yeah. We met through a mutual friend probably 12 years ago, maybe. Tina Madden, who was on the very first episode of The Dog Whisperer with Nunu, the demon chihuahua.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
I remember that. Yeah.
So I met Tina when I was working very heavily with Cesar in the early days. And as time went on, she ended up eventually, long story, but she ended up introducing me to Brian. He had actually initially tried to get into one of my workshops back when I was teaching solo workshops and charging $75 for a full day, including a homemade lunch. I didn't quite know how to price myself in those days, but they were fun. They were fun to do, but it was a lot. But they filled up so quickly because they were smaller, and so he was never able to do that. And then eventually Tina introduced us, and I thought he had a lot of talent, and we began to give each other cases because I'm up here in Templeton, so I'm about 3.5 hours north of Brian in LA. So I would get a client that I couldn't take in. They were in LA. It just made sense. I would send them to Brian. Brian would send some to me that required a different, maybe maybe a female perspective in some cases, or somebody that needed a pack, which I have a definite pack. And then when Cesar had asked me to create Training Cesar's Way for him, well, it wasn't, I came up with that name, but when he wanted me to come, to create this workshop for him, I was happy to do it. I was excited about doing it, from the curriculum to, I did everything from scratch, but the number of people that he wanted me to train at any given workshop was more than what I felt that I could do and still maintain the credibility or the integrity of the course. So I wanted to bring somebody else on, and he said, well, hire somebody. So I brought Brian in, and he had never done anything in front of the public before. And, he was just amazing. The very first time that he spoke, he was a natural at it. And so we did the first 5 Training Cesar's Way. He and I basically taught together with Cesar. And then when we left, we had already created Lucas Agnew prior to that, because we wanted a more affordable course for young trainers and a more hands-on course. And so that's what we did. And I don't know, have I lost your original question?
No,
I'm not sure.
No, you answered it perfectly. In fact,
Okay.
I think it's super interesting to hear the history of how the workshops come together, because back then it's like I guess before the Dog Whisperer, there weren't that many dog training resources, right? I mean, you could get books in stores, but I think to credit Dog Whisperer, you have to credit Cesar for bringing these issues that everyday people are having with their dogs to light. And that's, I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
The demand was there for you to create a workshop, and then you just kind of ran with it. And now your workshop is doing really well. We had a conversation in one of our virtual training sessions, if you can remember this. We were talking about common taglines that are often said in TV shows. And I was talking about, more specifically, exercise, discipline, affection. And I don't know if you remember this, but you were explaining about how exercise, first of all, the tagline is a little too simplistic to apply in all cases. And in a 22-minute show, these things are just way sped up and just overly simplistic to address all behaviors. Do you want to touch on that and just explain to everybody who's listening how it may be a lot more complicated than just following a formula of exercise,
Right.
discipline, affection?
Right. Yeah, it is more complicated, but you're exactly right that in a TV show, you have 3 little segments with commercial breaks in a probably a total of 22 minutes. And in that time, you have to not only educate, but entertain. So obviously you can't turn a dog's behavior around in that period of time. So you have to just give the most entertaining, the most educational aspects of it. And you have to boil everything down to something much more simplistic than it actually is. So it's not a deception. It's just a simplistic way of looking at things. But yeah, there's of course, way more to it than that. And one of the things one of the fallouts from people taking that literally and thinking that there's nothing, they'll exercise their dogs for 2 hours and then their dogs end up getting in a fight at the end, you know, which can happen. And it actually happened when I was working with Cesar too. And we would hike the dogs off leash for 4 hours and come back and sometimes have fights. But, you know, we also had 40 dogs we were putting together and some of the toughest cases too. So it's not going to resolve everything, but it's a very important ingredient, because if you're exercising your dog religiously, you're draining a lot of that energy, as well as, you know, giving the dog an outlet for that energy has to go somewhere. So if there's a lot of frustration built up, especially with a dog that requires a lot of exercise, and not just physical exercise, but sometimes mental stimulation, different things that are going to challenge the dog mentally and psychologically. There are dogs that need that as well, that aren't just happy with, you know, walks. My husky could go for, you know, hours and hours and never even hardly take a breath. So when you drain that energy, it's obviously really important, but it's not everything. But there's no way it could be everything. That slogan could be everything.
Sure.
It's obviously more. There wouldn't be 9 seasons of Dog Whisperer if everything was that simple.
Sure, of
but
course.
If you notice, if you look back at all those episodes, though, in many cases, the same information is repeated over
Right.
and over and over again. Yet it still was fascinating when I think about the videos that I do, sometimes I feel like I'm being redundant in my subject matter, but every time I do, someone goes, "Oh, that really resonated with me." And I thought, well, I just said it. And like 2 videos ago, I had a different, take on it that particular day. So I was inspired to do a video, but we're basically all repeating the same information over and over again. There are some concepts that are just there. They're just concepts that are not going to change. They're solid, and everything else stems from there. Nuances stem from there, but the basic concepts remain the same, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm really glad you mentioned the example of, taking out 40 dogs for a walk, and then you get back and there's still maybe fights, because one of the things that we learned a lot, and I want to get more into the training now, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Some training education. One of the things that we learned at the workshop was the importance of drives.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to touch on why drives are important and how it can help a trainer and an owner?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex, complicated subject. There's a lot to it, and it's not something that most trainers focus on, but it is. I did a consultation this morning with a couple that have a German Shorthair Pointer that is unbelievably high drive dog. In fact, I asked them, when you purchased her from the breeder, did you find out if she came from a working line or a show line or a pet line? Because there's a difference. And the ones that are bred, and they were telling me that they knew of a breeder that actually wouldn't even sell their dogs to somebody unless they were planning on hunting with that dog or doing sport with that dog, because they knew that dog wouldn't be fulfilled. So I'd never heard anybody take it to that extreme, but in a way it's kind of responsible, really.
Sure.
It's responsible because you actually know what you're breeding and you want that dog to have that outlet. So that's an example of a working drive or a prey drive. That's basically what dogs go in and out of all day long. So if you're working with your dog and your dog is definitely dialed into you, and you're doing place work with the dog, or you're doing recall with the dog and the dog's completely dialed into you, that's what we would consider pack drive, where there's a connection between you and your dog. Then a bird flies or a lizard goes by or a squirrel or something like that happens, and suddenly your dog's focus goes immediately to that animal because that predatory response kicks in. And that's considered prey drive. You call the dog back out of that to do recall and call them to your side. Now the dog is back in prey drive. So those are the examples. That the prey drive and pack drive are the things that most people understand, that most people really deal with. And they need to understand that there's nothing. A lot of people think, oh, my dog's in prey drive. That's terrible. They want to kill things. No, prey drive can be nothing more than using their nose, scenting something. That's prey drive. Obviously, it represents when they're smelling something, they're smelling to find out who was there, is it edible, all the different things that go through their brains. That's prey drive. Pack drive is when there's a connection back to you, or they're working as dogs that work as a unit. And then there's variables of prey drive even in that. If a pack of wolves is walking and they're packed up together, they're in that drive, they're still out looking for prey. So that's where it gets kind of
sure, yeah,
blurred.
Yeah,
and then there's different. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm hoping that somebody who, if this is completely foreign to them, and now we just made them aware that this is something that you may want to look into, because maybe it's something that somebody's dog, maybe it displaying prey drive or pack drive, and maybe it's something that if an owner is aware of it, maybe they can get some good tips, or perhaps look you up and get some good tips on how to work with a dog like that, because a lot of people don't know.
Right. And this dog this morning, she's always going to have prey drive. I mean, She's a working breed. She's a sporting breed dog. But what I gave them today were lots of examples of how to let her fulfill that drive and go after chase balls and do different things. But she has to have a strong recall as well, or that drive is not manageable in a human household. Right. So I taught them how to let her go into that drive, but then to call her out and to pack up with them. The more they nurture that pack drive, the more compliance they're going to get from the dog. And then I don't know if the show is going to allow us to go into depth about a lot of things, but there's defense drive as well, which is an interesting topic, but maybe for another day.
Yeah, I was actually looking at because when we graduated from the Lucas Agnew workshop, you provided an awesome amount of material on paper. And I actually didn't realize that I never got to read the stuff because I just kind of packed it and left. And I was in preparation for this interview, I wanted to read it, and I was reading about the drives. And it has defense drive,
right,
fight, and how you can drive the drives. Like it does get really in depth and into it. It's
very in depth, and it can be very complicated.
Sure.
There's a lot of nuances in it, but there's in a nutshell, if you're looking at a dog that has low defense drive, it's basically a dog that will go into a defensive posture very easily.
Sure.
Where, you'll get dogs like that, where you barely make a sound or you barely touch them, and they'll immediately go into attempt to bite. That would be one example of it, a defensive drive. And then there are others that are high defense, and they're the kind, like Brian has a dog like that, basically, that is just, you can poke him or do anything or go, "Hey, Juno," and knock it off. And you could do just about anything to him, and he'll just look at you like, "Yeah, what?"
I do remember Juno.
Yeah.
He's
just
a
very
dog.
confident. He's a very confident dog. And so.
Cheri, another thing that we harped on at the workshop, long line work and place training. And I'll put it in a nutshell. Long line work is when you are using a long lead or a long leash to work with the dog in specific exercises. Like, for example, working on recall when they're far out, maybe paying attention to that bird over there, and then you use a long line to get their attention back and come to you. Place training is where you are showing a dog a specific place, usually a raised bed, and you're asking the dog to just do nothing but stay there. And the concept is supposed to be that their place is their safe space, right? And we saw some amazing cases where that's one of the best things about the workshop is you see these cases happen live. And but my question is, so obedience versus behavior training. I think people kind of get these two mixed up, and I think sometimes there are these camps where there are obedience trainers think that the behavior stuff is outdated or based on false information, and then some behaviorists don't pay attention to obedience training at all. I like to follow people who integrate and are very open-minded and to just kind of integrate anything that they can to, it's what's best for the dog, right? So my question is, how did you start implementing long line work and place training in your behavior rehabilitation? When did you see it as something valuable?
Well, because the first use of the long line for me, and this is what I teach my students as well, is that it's the perfect tool to evaluate the dog, who the dog is, what kind of drive the dog is in, primarily, if they have a lot of pack drive, if they have prey drive, do they come back into you easily, or do they require some leash pressure? So it's a great, we use our 15-foot Lucas Agnew long lines, and that's just about enough line to use without getting tangled up in it. When you get past 15 feet, it's just really hard to manage that much line. So to us, it's the perfect length. And like you said, this is what I was doing this morning with the same client, is her recall was lacking because she was so prey driven. So we let her go out on the line. When she hits the end of the line, she creates her own pressure, right? So she's out 15 feet, hits the end of the line. I'm just standing there holding the loop. She hits the end of the line, creates the pressure. And then what she does after that is she'll come back in once she hits the end of the line. So she created pressure. She yielded to the pressure. So I released the pressure. So I'm not dragging her in by the leash. I'm just letting her come back into me. So by letting her go out and come back in, I'm nurturing that pack drive. I'm evaluating how much natural drive she has on her own. And my hope is that the next time she goes out, she doesn't hit the end of the line. She's actually more interested in finding out where I am and should she come back or not. That's how you begin to nurture that pack drive and develop it, especially with a dog that is a high prey drive dog or high working dog, high drive dog in terms of work, that's what you want to nurture is that. And that's a perfect tool for that. Recall, obviously, if a dog goes out and you do need to pull the dog in, you've got 15 feet of line to pull them into. What was the other? Place work.
Yes.
Yeah. So place work is like, it's the foundation. It's the foundation of what I do. The reason that I love place work is I teach the dog that that's where they go to, stay there, relax there, chill out there. It's a do not disturb zone. They don't get praise there. They don't get treats there. I don't train with food anyway, but they especially don't get food there. Again, my client this morning was a perfect example for this show because what they were doing, they couldn't understand why she wasn't as good with place work as she was when she was here for a board and train. Well, that's because they started integrating food into place work. So here food is, it conditions the brain to be excited. Now they're trying to create calm on a place board, but they're adding food to the exercise. And it's not necessary because the dog is going to be so content to go to that place to decompress that is the reward. The reward is in the process of decompressing. You don't need to add sugar to your frosted flakes, which is what they were doing basically by adding food. You see? So that is the foundational principle. So that way, if I have a dog that is practicing a behavior that I don't like, instead of just telling the dog, no, don't, knock it off, stop, I can say, instead of doing this, why don't you do that? You see? So I've got I can correct the dog by saying, leave it. And then I can direct the dog by sending them to the place where they have naturally learned how to decompress. I'm really speeding the process up as I'm explaining it to you, but
sure.
You understand what I mean. So that's what happens too often in dog training. Well, not with dog training, but with clients, is that they just keep telling their dog no over and over again, but they're not telling the dog what to do instead. And they're simple creatures. They require direction. They don't know how to navigate this life with humans unless we tell them step by step, just the same way we would our children. We don't just tell our children no. We tell them, don't do that this way, do it that way, right?
Yes.
Same principle.
Tons of questions for you on that, Cheri. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned that you don't use food when you train. And I remember you actually saying this at the workshop too. My question is, how do you motivate a dog that is spoiled by their owners and they're just not used to working? They're used to getting everything for free, and then they come to you, and now you're trying to get this dog to do what you want to do, either on the place work or long line work. I've worked with some dogs where they are just not interested in you or what you have to say or what you want them to do. So how do you go about doing that without using food? Well,
the first thing is that my assumption is that the dog's not a very happy dog if he's been basically coddled and spoiled, because that's going to tell me that he basically rules the roost. The owners get to live in the home with him, not the other way around. And at their core, I don't believe there's any such thing as a dog that is in charge, that can really be in charge. That's where you see a lot of neurotic behavior with dogs, where the owner inadvertently puts the dog in charge by basically bowing to their every wish, by not providing them with any structure, any boundaries, any leadership. And now the dog has the weight of the world on them. So from one perspective, you can look at it and go, oh, that dog was so spoiled to get everything they want. The way I look at it is that's not the way the dog wants to live. The dog wants to earn what he gets. It's not that the dog, when they come into our lives, it's not that, oh, you don't have to hunt for your food anymore. You don't have to go out and find prey. My feeling is now you get to work. Now that you're with me, you get to work for what you get, and which is the way they're hardwired. They don't want anything for free. If you think about what any given day is in the natural world of a dog, everything is about survival. Or let's say a wolf, everything is about survival. So when that pack wakes up in the morning, they have to go out and find prey, catch the prey, kill the prey, wait their turn to eat, find water, fend off predators, deal with inclement weather. And what do they get at the end of the day? They don't get a cookie. They don't get a high five. They don't get a good boy. They get to live one day. That's it. And that's how they're wired. And to this day, they're still wired like that, which is why when you put a dog in an environment where they have to wait at thresholds before they go through, They have to stay beside or slightly behind the owner when they walk. They have to wait for their food and give eye contact. They have to go to a place when they're told. Those are the most balanced, happiest dogs you'll ever find, because everything is off of them now. Now they've got someone saying, you can just retire. You're in my world now. We don't go out into the wild to have a relationship with dogs. They come into our world. So we have to make sure that they know how to navigate this human life so that they can live with us successfully, right? So right. We have to be the ones to lead. If we turn it around and make them feel that they can do whatever they want, that's not a happy dog. I have never had a problem getting a dog's attention without food. If I do need food to get their attention, it feels like a bribe to me. And I don't feel that the connection is genuine. I feel like it's okay. All right, throw me the treat. I'll do whatever you say. I know that's going to be a controversial statement, and you're probably going to get some blowback on that. But this is what I have done over the last 21 years, and it's been effective for me. I don't believe I could speed up the process anymore if I did use food. I think I could get the dog's attention, but would it be a legitimate connection to me? I don't think so. It would be towards the food, but not me. So I prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, or the raw way. This
is golden stuff, Cheri. You know, if it's controversial, then so be it, because I really do think people do need to hear it. Do you feel the same way? Because I'll give you another example. So, using excitement and loud noises and big movements to get a dog's attention. Do you feel the same way, that would be like a sort of a cheap way of getting a dog's attention, or maybe that attention would be temporary?
I think it's the perfect thing to do if you're doing agility or any kind of high drive work with your dog. Right. That's when it works, because you need that dog to be adrenalized. You need to have that dog in a high drive in order to complete the agility course and do the things that would be exceptional task for a dog to do, not an everyday sit, stay, come, none of that, right? So in that environment, it's perfect. I have never done, I participated in some bite work where I got to put a sleeve on and get attacked. Yeah. A long time ago, when I was doing a show in Singapore, there was a guy there that was part of the show that did bite work, and that was really fun. I stay in my own lane. I really admire these people that do that and do the high obedience, and some of the most amazing people that I follow on Instagram are just like, wow, I could never do that, but I stay in my lane. I do what I do. And that's how I think we should keep it. But I believe that probably you would have to ask somebody that does that kind of work, but I'm pretty sure they keep the dog in a pretty high drive. And they probably, I don't know, they probably use food for bite work, and certainly for scent work, because that's the whole idea. And for agility, I know they use food, because I used to attend an agility course that's here locally, but this was like years ago before I even did any training. So I know then you want to keep that dog kind of up. Sure. But for the sake of what we want to achieve, most of my clients want in their home, it's calm. If your dog is calm, they will not bite someone. If your dog is calm, they won't go after another dog. If your dog is calm, they'll go to their place when you tell them to. If your dog is calm, they'll come back when they're called. So calm is king. And if you want calm, then you wouldn't bring something that's going to excite the dog. Calm is king. I just wanted to reiterate what you said. I love that. I've never said it before. I'll probably say it again now. but I really love that you said that, because most of the trainers that I admire are the ones that rely on calm energy as their base. Because to me, it just makes sense, and it's how I like to work with dogs. And you mentioned earlier that you don't use a lot of words, you don't talk a lot. You mentioned that you don't like to use food because it feels like a bribe, and not using such high amounts of energy or high pitched voices and things like that. Whenever I have to do stuff like that, it just doesn't feel genuine. It doesn't feel like I'm being myself. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, everybody can be calm. If you want your dog to be calm, that's like, to me, it just makes sense. You gotta lead your dog the way, lead your dog the way you want your dog to behave back, if that makes sense. Like if I'm going to be calm,
and I want my dog to be calm, then, you know, it has to be a back and forth kind of relationship, right?
Right.
Cheri, you posted an Instagram video the other day, and I wanted to read this quote that you said that really resonated with me. You said, always ask your dog for something before giving them anything. And this was a video that you put out on leash pulling. And I thought this was genius. I really thought this was genius because you started talking about squaring off to your dog if they're pulling you, and using that as a way of getting attention. Do you want to explain a little bit more on how that can be helpful for somebody who has a dog that pulls on a leash?
Right. Well, first of all, keep in mind that pulling on a leash is not an issue. It's a symptom of an issue. And we can say that about just about anything that a dog does. The client comes to you with a long list of issues in quotes, but actually, once you get to know the client and you start talking to them, you can see that basically, in many cases, the dog is mirroring the very things that the human is dealing with as well. You have an anxious owner, you get an anxious dog, fearful dog, so on and so forth. So the whole goal, which is why, like, you have a very calm demeanor. I've obviously met you and worked with you in person, and you have a very mellow, calm demeanor. It's kind of natural to you. A lot of people that doesn't come naturally to. And so for me, teaching someone how to become calm and how to basically, here's the key, how to become the tool yourself. So you represent the tool. You walk into the yard when your dogs are playing too rough, the dogs see you out of their peripheral vision and they break it up and move aside because you have shown up, you have arrived. It's not that you had to go get a certain leash or you had to get a certain tool or you had to say a certain command. Your very presence, actually your calm presence and your command presence, that's the key, is what actually interrupted that state of mind that your dogs were in and separated them. Same thing with leash pulling. Leash pulling is a symptom of an issue. In most cases, it's that the dog hasn't been taught, that the human hasn't told them exactly where they want them to be. They just assume they're going to stay by their side. And then in a lot of cases, it's that the human isn't relevant to the dog. So why would you want to stay next to somebody that's not relevant to you, that you don't matter to? So what dogs do understand without training, the language of the animal kingdom is spatial pressure. So what I mean when I say square off to the dog, if the dog is on, for example, I use this a lot with place work. If the dog is on place and then they're not quite sure, they're just in the beginning phases of the exercise and they start to go, okay, I'm laying on place. All right, I'm going to get up now. Well, then you have a couple of different options. If you've got the leash on the dog, you can take the dog back and put him on place. But the more intuitive way to do it, the way that's going to resonate with the dog even easier, is if you stand in front of the dog and square off and actually take a step in while maintaining eye contact with the dog. 99.9% of dogs are going to recognize that spatial pressure as a language. It's amazing. The 3 conic horses that I have here that were feral, that was the number one language that we had in common that I took advantage of to train them. They were so sensitive to spatial pressure because they were so raw. They had never had human influence before. So the dogs that don't recognize it are the ones that have just been super coddled, never asked for anything. And so they've lost that instinct of being able to recognize spatial pressure and that authority moving in towards them. So yeah, if your dog is pulling on the leash and you can actually kind of rotate your body slightly so that you're kind of squaring off with them, when I have a pack, it's harder to do because it's hard for me to just stop one dog.
Sure.
But I've gotten to the point that all I have to do is barely move my shoulder and sort of move my head slightly. They'll recognize that and they'll slow down and back up. But if you're just one-on-one with your dog, you can literally stop and then go ahead and turn so that you're facing the dog and stand until the dog recognizes that as either to stop or to back up, and then keep moving. I do a lot of backwards walking too with my dogs and new client dogs where I'm backing up. So I'm using automatically as I'm backing up, watching where I'm going, of course, with the eyes in the back of my head. Then I'm actually have the benefit of teaching them that they need to walk at my pace. And I deliberately slow way down, but I'm also using that spatial pressure by squaring off with them, which is something they automatically understand. It's just a given.
I think it's amazing that what you said, the 3 cane corsos that you had, they were feral, and they were dropped off to you for you to work with them, and they had no human interaction, but the only language they understood was body language. And
Right.
that's how you were able to rehab them. So I think that's super powerful, because if you can do it with feral dogs, anybody can learn to do it with their own dogs. That's a domesticated dog. So
Right.
I thought that was that's really important. Great. Okay, let's go. I want to give you another scenario that I feel is a little bit common, but it's a little bit specialized in the scenario. So resource guarding. I think it's really easy when, sometimes trainers will say things like, okay, you need to take away all the toys in the house. Don't leave the food out, things like that. And then that way, you're the one that provides everything to your dog, and you say when they can play and when they can, things like that. But if you have a group of dogs, and let's say you're, at a dog park and it's outside and there's a stick on the ground. I've seen it where a dog is great until they grab that stick, start chewing on it, and then another dog wants that same stick. How do you prevent, is there a way to kind of communicate with that dog and let them know that, no, that's not your stick, or that's my stick? Or how would you kind of, how would you advise somebody that might be having that kind of issue? Because it's kind of hard to make sure there's never any sticks around. You kind of get what I'm saying with the question?
I do, but we have to back up with that a little bit further and say
Sure.
that, first of all, I wouldn't go to it. I don't go to dog parks. I don't
neither
recommend
do
them
I.
to anybody.
Neither do I, actually.
No, they are nightclubs without bouncers. So,
Yeah.
you don't know what's in there. You don't know what kind of dogs are in there. And more importantly, you don't know if their handlers are savvy handlers, or if they're texting and on Instagram and with their lattes, as
Right.
opposed to actually watching what their dogs are doing. And sometimes it's like an easy way to drain the energy, but there's all kinds of horrible things that can happen in dog parks that dogs never get over. So I wouldn't set that up for failure. I would, because that could happen. And plus you're dealing with dogs that you don't know, right? So it's hard enough to deal with your own dog and get compliance from your own dog in that environment. But if you have to find a way to get another dog to respect your authority that you don't even know, that's not good. So I would avoid that setup in the first place. That
Okay.
being said, I would teach a dog from very early on. Even if you rescue a dog as an adult, you can still mold and guide that dog into the kind of dog that you want, with very few exceptions. And I would teach them basically that everything is yours, and they will get it. I'm not big on taking things away from a dog, but
Sure.
what I am big on is saying that you get it when I tell you can get it. And when I need you to drop it and give it back to me, then you have to do that first. So those would be things that I would do in an undistracted situation or scenario, where there isn't someone else vying for the same stick or the same ball or whatever. It's still tricky. I mean, to be honest with you, it's still tricky. If a dog has a big resource guarding issue and you put them in that environment, some might say that's a recipe for disaster and a setup for failure. And it would just depend on the severity of that dog's issue. And Reuben is a perfect example of that. My Akita that you met when you were here.
Yeah.
The way I got Reuben is because when he was 10 weeks old, believe it or not, he actually showed his teeth to his owner when he put the food bowl down, because the owner didn't get away from the food fast enough. And there were other members in that household that did the same thing. They retreated from him, and he was just a puppy. So he learned very early on that he could move humans away by showing his teeth. So they called me in for a consultation, and I said, well, give me a bowl of food. And I put the food down. And as Reuben walked in towards me, I took a step in and leaned slightly into him. And it was just the old school, basically bringing a command presence to him. And he backed up, sat down, looked away, licked his lips like a stressor. And I picked up the food bowl, and then I offered it to him again. And this time he waited. I can take anything from that dog's mouth now. And that was years ago. He's been with me. The owner ended up giving him to me for a variety of different reasons, but none of them had anything to do with Ruben's behavior. He was traveling a lot. But that was resolved 100% with him. But he was also at a very young formative age, where it's when we start retreating from our dogs, when they have things, is when we make an imprint on the dog that he can take whatever he wants from us, and we'll back away. So once again, the best way to avoid that is to bring a command presence to your dog where he would never dream of challenging you over something in the first place. That would be the goal. And if the dog's already developed that behavior, then I would say, let's back up and redo this relationship, restructure it, teach the dog boundaries, teach the dog how to wait for everything. That would be the best. I mean, it's honestly hard to give an answer that somebody can take and go, okay, I'll do this next time it happens, because
Sure.
I also don't want to set someone up I will tell you, don't try to take something from a dog's mouth.
Yeah.
That much I can tell you.
Yeah, sure.
And definitely the way dogs do things in their natural world is if one dog wants something, they'll step in toward that dog, and the subordinate dog or submissive dog will drop whatever he has, or a fight will ensue. Those are the only options.
Sure.
One will walk away. The other one will, and if they challenge each other, then there's going to be a fight. So I don't know if I fully answered that question. It's kind of a complicated question.
It actually does make sense, because you're saying that if you have a dog that resource guards, don't ever put them in any kind of situation where they can be in that situation where they would pick something up off the ground with another dog around, because you don't know, like, because I'm thinking, what if you're at a friend's house and, it's a play date and you're in their backyard. Perhaps there was a stick in the backyard or something like that. So it's better to be aware of your dog and what he or she could be capable of, so that you can not set them up for failure, like you mentioned. So yes, I think that does make sense.
But that being said, let me throw one more thing out, because
Sure.
it would be irresponsible not to.
Yeah.
When all of that changes dramatically is when you have children. Because that's when you really need to decide, okay, I have an infant or a toddler, and I've got a dog that's coming into the home that's either been there first or whatever it is. That dog has to be bomb-proof around resources.
Absolutely.
Because you can tell your child all day long, don't do this around the dog. They're kids, right? So they're going to break rules. They don't know. That's why they're kids. You can also have a child that could drop a Cheerio, and the dog could go after it and hurt the child or have it in their hands. So you have to make that dog really bomb-proof. If that's what you don't want. Because there's so much opportunity for a mistake to be made in that environment, and your children's safety always must come first.
Sure, absolutely. So in other words, what you're saying is it's better to work on an issue than to ignore it, because it'd be easy for me, if I had a dog that was a resource guarder, to be like, okay, well, I'll never take them to the dog park and I'll never have them play with other dogs. But in that scenario, if I'm going to have a child, now I might have a real problem, because I never actually worked on fixing the behavior issue. I just kind of didn't address it.
And it needs to, the way it's done in a nutshell is just teaching a dog to move away from something, to drop something, leave it, and to move away. That's another time when place work comes in really handy. It's not practical to say that, you have to have place work with you a place board with you all the time if you're going to move your dog away from a resource. That's not practical. But if you teach the dog by being very specific about going to place when the dog is about to take something you don't want him to take, and then interrupting that state of mind and taking him to a place so he's anchored on that place, that's where you begin, so that you figure out how to take that dog into resource guarding mode, into a more submissive, compliant mode, and then you can recreate that without the place board. Because that's what I do with my dogs now. I can turn at any time and go, hey, and all I have to do is snap my fingers and look, and they know that whatever they do, if they just back up and retreat a little bit from me and sit down, there's not going to be a problem. So it's a concept. It goes from being something very strict when you're first training it to you do it this way, you do it this way, you do it this way. And then it becomes just a concept, a state of mind. It's a state of mind that you can capture. once it's dialed in really strongly. So I would say that's one of the most important things to work with your dog, whether you have kids or not. Because you know what? You have friends that have kids.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
That come over. So strictly managing a dog is not enough with that, but it's part of it, but it's not enough.
Cheri, I'd like to ask you a rescue-based question, because rescue is your first passion. You have the Second Chance at Love Humane Society, and you actually have it on your property.
Right.
I imagine you're taking shelter dogs in almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, we've this last year has been tough on rescue, as you know. So I haven't taken in as many this last year. It's probably been the slowest year ever. We just took an adorable pit bull in that I named Thelma.
Okay.
She's super cute. I just took her in probably 2 days ago. I have to get photos of her and get her up on social media and find her and everything. She's super cute. And I've got, honestly, so many of the rescue dogs are up here with me now. They're not at my shelter because they need daily interaction with people. Andy, the senior shepherd mix that was taken from a very abusive situation. It's a long involved story with somebody that was treated a large number of dogs, over 100 dogs, very poorly. And she was basically sent into put into a yard and just left alone for 7 years, not leashed up, had no human interaction with anybody. So she came more feral than the Corsos, if you can believe that.
Oh,
so
wow.
She's up here. Actually, I just had her groomed today. There are pictures on Instagram today of
cool.
her. We actually were able to trim up her feet and blow dry her and put a little St. Patrick's Day scarf on her. And she was nervous about it, but to be able to do that now is pretty amazing. And then the Corsos are all with me. So these are all rescue dogs. I have Vega. I have a shepherd that I'm hoping was going to be placed on the 17th with this wonderful student of mine that's coming up from LA, down in the LA area to get her. So yeah, I have more of the dogs up here at my home than I do in my actual shelter. Because the dogs need more interaction with people and the pack.
So I think you actually answered my question. My question was going to be, how do you balance working on the behavior issues of your rescue dogs as well as your client dogs while also keeping your own personal pack balanced?
Oh my gosh. I work a lot. I work a lot. Well, fortunately, my pack is balanced and pretty dialed in. But that being said, they still work every single day. They still are asked to wait at thresholds. They still do place work every day. They do pack walks every day. The beauty of it is that my dogs are so cool that they work for me. So if I have a client up with a dog, their own dog, and that dog is reactive to other dogs, I bring out my pack and we go for a walk. And I integrate that dog into my pack. So my dogs are getting worked every day, no matter what. The rescue dogs, if they're up in my home, then they're being treated as part of my pack. I do have crates. At any given time, I have 25 plus dogs in my home, my actual home.
Wow.
So I have an office that I added onto this house several years ago, and I have crates set up in there. But the dogs are, that being said, they're in and out. They rotate. Some of them come in here when I'm cooking dinner. There might be a dozen dogs on their beds right behind the kitchen. Right, we're in the kitchen area, but behind the island where I cook. So There's a separation there. But yeah, so they're just integrated into my life. I mean, there's something to be said for setting aside a time to do formal training, like 5 minutes of this, 10 minutes of that, 15 minutes of do formal place work training, and then formal long line training. But that being said, you can integrate training in throughout your day, almost effortlessly, just asking the dog to wait before he comes, coming out of the crate too hot, or going through the door, or waiting at the top of the stairs every morning. I do a roll call and I ask each of my dogs to come down individually. Those are all things that don't cost me any time. No time whatsoever. They're going to come down the stairs anyway, right?
Right.
I have 5 dogs that sleep in my room. They're all going to come down the stairs in the morning. So why not add a couple of, I put them on Instagram all the time. So they're 15 seconds. Sure. It takes 15 seconds for them to come down the stairs by name. So really, that's not a great imposition on my day. So if people just understood that, how easy it is to integrate these training moments throughout your day, I think people would be much more likely to follow through with things.
I'm so glad I asked you that question because, I mean, part of one of the announcements I wanted to share with you is my wife and I just closed on a house, and
that's awesome.
And we have 2 acres of property.
Oh, wow.
And we have a place for the eventual rescue dogs, and we have, a great size house, and we have a pool so that I can work dogs in the pool.
That's amazing.
So, so you're like an inspiration because, and I've talked to other trainers too, and we all kind of agree that you have the dream. You have the property, you have the dogs, the shelter. So, I hope to follow in your footsteps, at least on a small scale. It's really awesome to watch what you do and to be able to talk to you, because I want to know how to integrate my rescue dogs into our pack. I want to bring them inside the house and, have them on place boards while we're cooking dinner or watching a movie or something like that. I don't want them to be a burden. I want them to be part of the family life. That way they're more used to being part of a family and inside a house when they get adopted. So it's really great. I will probably be picking your brain a lot.
I'm so happy for you. The very first time we spoke, you told me about your recent move from New York, right?
Yeah.
New York?
Yes.
And I remember you saying that you were really hoping that you guys would be able to buy a home. So I'm really happy for you. Yeah. And that sounds perfect. You've got everything you need. 2 acres is plenty of land.
Yes,
really.
It sure is because the landscaping cost is quite a pretty penny.
Oh, I'm sure. But in Florida, everything grows like crazy too.
Yeah, with all the rain and the sunshine. But so it's really exciting. And one of the things I'm most excited about, Cheri, honestly, is to be able to invite people over, invite people like you, invite people like the trainers that I met at your workshops, and say, hey, why don't you come down for a weekend? Let's do some work with the dogs, and show me some stuff that maybe I can be doing better, or go to a shelter with me. Let's pick out some more dogs for the rescue. Like I'm really excited. Maybe I can invite some trainers so that we can do some workshops for the community and have people learn how to be better owners, have a better relationship with their dogs. So I have a lot of ideas, and this place was the first real big win to set those in motion. So I'm definitely excited. Last question, Cheri. Last question. The Lucas Agnew workshops, you have, from what I can tell, at least 4 of them. You have the Raw Intuitive Talent Missing Link, Train the Trainers. You just started doing a workshop with Oregon Tales, the guys from Oregon. And then you also have a women's only workshop. Mm-hmm. Did I get them all?
Yes, I think so. Brian and I do 2 missing link workshops, which is the same. That's the Raw Intuitive. It's Lucas Agnew Raw Intuitive Talent. Yeah, that's kind of our tagline. And that's we came up with that because that's what we want to teach, is raw intuitive talent. So in other words, somebody can think on their feet. That's what we wanted to make it for, is for young upcoming trainers. Although we get half of the people that have come into our Lucas Agnew workshops are just civilian dog owners, but we wanted to teach something where people don't have to refer to a manual or a YouTube video or anything. They can just go, okay, let me use my intuitive talent here and just figure out what kind of strategy to create for this situation. So that's why we came up with that. So we do 2 a year. Prior to this last year, Brian and I would separate, and each of us would go to a different foreign country. I went to Germany 2 years in a row. He went to England and the Netherlands, but we didn't travel, obviously, last year. I'm not sure if I will even do that again. I won't say no that I won't, but I guess I'm not itching for it as much. Right now, travel just has become very messy, at least international travel. I teach 4 Train the Trainers a year, and those are basically, that's what I do in lieu of my individual shadow programs. What I discovered is that it's absolutely exhausting to do a one-on-one shadow. It's exhausting for the student, and it's exhausting for me, and it's exhausting for the dog. So what I came up with was a shadow program, but I have 6 to 8 students in it. So what happens is nobody gets fried. the dogs stay fresh through the 5 days. It's a Monday through Friday class. I teach the basics, but then the rest of it is basically, it's based on what cases are here. And so far, every one of them that I've done has been exceptionally wonderful. Just really played out really well. And everybody was exhausted at the end, but not as fried as when I have a student asking me if they can get off early, when they're here for an individual shadow because they're just exhausted. I don't want that. I want, they learn a lot, but there's only so much work you can do in an 8-hour day. And so if you're doing it with multiple students, it just makes it a lot better, but just not too many. And then the Wellness Unleashed, that's for women only. And that's something that I came up with because the vast majority of my clients are women, which probably the same for you. Most of the time, the family member that calls to make the appointment with the trainer is the woman. It just works out that way. They're the ones that become the most proactive. But I also saw very early on this dynamic between the woman and her dog that was pretty amazing. And I found that I could only get so far with those women with their dogs if I could address some of the issues that the women were having with themselves, whether it be a lack of confidence, getting deeper into it. I see a lot of women that they never question their thoughts and they define themselves by their own thoughts and they make themselves miserable. I'm not a therapist, but I was chronically depressed for 20 years, for 2 decades, starting in my teenage years. And I dug myself out of that over a long period of time. And that is so foreign to me now that I can't even remember what it felt like to be depressed. But I did a lot of work back in the day. So I felt like I'm just going to try this, a few years ago, maybe 6 years ago is 7 years ago, I did my first one. And let me see if I have anything of value to add to a woman and her relationship with her dog. And it turned out to be phenomenal. And so I've since honed the workshop to where it's exactly where I want it, where we spend about half the time with our dogs and half the time with ourselves. And then we marry the two. And it's pretty cool. It's one of my favorite workshops. So, yeah. So I think that's all of them.
That is awesome.
There's a lot. Yeah.
Well, if anybody is out there listening, first of all, I'm forever grateful that you invited me to your workshop last year. Honestly, it was probably the highlight of my 2020.
Thank you.
It really was amazing. And if anybody out there is listening, it's so worth it. It doesn't even matter where you're flying from. Just get out to Templeton, figure it out, and just do one of the workshops. I think it's super worth it. Cheri, thank you so much for doing this. This has been exactly what I wanted, a very education-heavy hour, and I hope somebody out there learned something from this. I mean, how could you not? There's so much good information. Thank you so much, Cheri. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to be with me here today.
I'm very honored that you invited me on, and I'm especially honored that I'm your finale. So
yeah,
thank
season
you so
finale.
much. I'm very grateful.
Thanks again, Cheri, for making the time to be on the show.
Please support Second Chance at Love Humane Society. You can do so at secondchancelove.org. If you'd like more information on Cheri Wulff Lucas, you can check out her website, cheriwulfflucas.com. And for more information on her and Brian Agnew's awesome workshop series, please check out lucasagnew.com. And you can follow Cheri on Instagram at Cheri_Wulff_Lucas.
And thank you, everyone out there who listened, reviewed, subscribed, and sent me messages. I appreciate you all. I'm really excited to get the ball rolling on our rescue efforts, especially now that we have the perfect property to do so. I'm going to be off for a much-needed break, but don't worry, Season 2 will be even bigger. Until then, tell everyone you know about the show. It'll be great for summer road trip binge listening. As always, follow Candace's Pack Dog Rescue on Instagram. See you in Season 2.
Thank you for listening to the Candace's Pack Dog Rescue Show. For news updates and training tips, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Facebook. You can find us at Candace's Pack Dog Rescue. If you would like to support the rescue, please visit our website at cpackdogrescue.org. For questions and comments, you can contact us at cpackdogrescue@gmail.com. And if you like the show, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your podcast app.